Hi everyone, welcome to our video presentation. My name is Charlotte and today I'm going to present with my colleagues Tanja and Ingrid. The main question of today is, how can Zara's evolution as a fast fashion retailer be explained with the global value chain framework? During this presentation we provide you with an answer on this question. So first I would like to discuss today's agenda with you. We will start with discussing the theoretical framework identified by Giraffe, Humphrey and Sturgeon to help explain governance patterns in global value chains. After that, we will introduce the Zara case, and lastly, we will apply the global value chain framework on the Zara case. And more specific, we will apply it on Zara's evolution. In order to get a better understanding of what the global value chain framework is, I would first like to give you the definition of the global value chain so you get familiar with today's topic. The global value chain is the process by which technology is combined with material and labor inputs, and then processed inputs are assembled, marketed, and distributed. In addition to this, the global value chain framework focuses on the nature and content of the interfirm linkages and the power that regulates value chain coordination, mainly between buyers and the first few tiers of suppliers. So now I would like to explain to you why the authors created the global value chain framework. Two of the most important new features of the contemporary economy have laid the groundwork for a variety of network forms of governance situated between arm's-length markets and large vertically integrated corporations. The two shifts are the globalization of production and trade and the vertical disintegration of transnational corporations. Giraffe, Humphrey, and Sturgeon identify in the article three variables that play a large role in determining how global value chains are governed and change. These variables are the complexity of transaction, the ability to codify transactions, and the capabilities in the supply chains. These variables can be found on the rows of the table in this slide. In addition, the theory generates 5 types of global value chain governance, which are in the range from high to low degree of explicit coordination and power asymmetry, hierarchy, captive, relational, modular, and market. These ones can be found on the columns in this table. In this slide, you can find the vital global value chain framework. In this graph, the small line arrows represent exchange based on price, while the larger block arrows represent thicker flows of information and control, regulated through explicit coordination. This includes instructions coming from a more powerful buyer to a less powerful supplier. When applying this framework to the apparel industry, to get a better understanding of this framework, we see a shift from the assembly-oriented captive model, which required explicit coordination in the form of cut fabric and detailed instructions, to the full package production relational model, which involves more complex forms of coordination, knowledge exchange, and supplier autonomy. I hope that by giving you this explanation, the global value chain framework is clear to you now. My colleagues will continue with an introduction to the Zara case, and lastly, they will apply this framework to Zara.
Thank you, Charlotte, for explaining the global value chain framework. In a later stadium, we will apply this framework on the Zara case, and I will now give an introduction to this Zara case. It's an article from Tocatli, and he considered the extent to which Zara, which is a major international clothing retailer and a pioneer of fast fashion principles, provides evidence concerning the variety of ways in which retailers source globally. In the next slide, I will explain what fast fashion means. But for now, it's important to know that until recently, Zara kept half of its production in Spain and Portugal, and therefore they have been known as the exception to globalization. Here I will explain what fast fashion means. There are a couple of requirements to be a fast fashion retailer. I will explain them one by one. The first point focuses on the fact that retailers have rapidly increasing numbers of stores worldwide. Secondly, there is the need to connect customers' demand with the upstream operations of design, procurement, production, and distribution. The third point is about the fact that there should be short development cycles, rapid prototyping, small batches, and variety. Furthermore, there must be a very fast and highly responsive supply chain. Also, it's important to know that most fast fashion retailers are publicly traded companies, and their success is now measured by stock performance, and they are increasingly under pressure to perform well on these stock markets. Also, fast fashion retailers collect larger percentages of the full price and therefore achieve higher net margins on sales. Now I will talk about the evolution from Zara, so the changes that they made during the last couple of years. In 1975, Zara opened their first store in Spain, and in 1985 they reorganized and they became a part of the group Inditex. This is a group of several retailers which also contain, for example, Bershka and Pull & Bear, and Zara also became a part of that group. In 1988 they opened their first store in Portugal, and that was their first cross-border store, so that was a big thing for Zara. In 1989 and in 1990 they opened two other stores, one in Paris and one in New York. So these were big steps in their history. In the 1980s, they were able to harness the latest information technology, and this was because they were a relative latecomer on the fast fashion market, and they could learn from the other companies who already done a lot of things with information technology, and they learned from the other companies and used that knowledge to improve their information technology. In the 1990s, Zara invested in information structure, and they also invested in a short, tight, flexible, and innovative supply chain. And therewith we can conclude that Zara went international in these years, and they invested in a rapid-fire supply chain. Now Ingrid will continue with the rest of the timeline, and she will also apply the global value chain framework on the evolution that Zara made, and thereby give the conclusion to the central question.
From of the 2000s, Zara bought around 40% of its fabrics in-house and outsourced the simple ones, like the outsourcing of manufacturing of basic sweaters, for example, to countries as China. Later on in 2002, the CEO of Inditex also announced that Zara would initially outsource around 60% of its manufacturing capabilities. So that makes that Zara is nowadays less of an exception to globalization, because they outsource more and more of the production capacity to partially industrialized countries. What can we conclude based on all this information? First of all, and mainly important, is that value chains are not static, because information complexity changes, and there is a continuing tension between codification and innovation. Also important is that supplier competence changes, and this is also the main reason for Zara's shift in value chain. Suppliers are learning and gain technological knowledge, which makes that they are capable to do more and more of the production Zara is asking for. Alright, in this slide we are going to give the answer on the central question of this presentation, and that is how Zara's evolution can be explained by the global value chain framework. Well, first of all, when Zara started in the 1980s with their company, they were a typical hierarchical value chain because they did everything in-house and the capabilities in the supply base were low. Later on, from of the 2000s, they became much more captive because they outsourced the manufacturing of simple products, like I just said, the manufacturing of basic sweaters. And this is because the ability to codify transactions were high. From of 2006, the value chain changes to relational, because there are now manufacturers in Turkey and India who make full package products, so they manufacture the products from beginning to the end, and this is because the capabilities in the supply base became high. So the degree of explicit coordination was first in the 1980s very high, and now later on it is much lower. So, well, I hope the answer is clear to the central question, and thank you for your attention.